So hello everyone to another episode of Mental Roots. My name is Nathan Day. I'm 22 years old. If you've been listening so far, thank you so much. This is, I guess, by a young black Brit for young black Brits, specifically young men. In our age today, mental health is becoming more and more of a buzzword, but I really want to kind of dissect it and unpack what this term means to us as young black men, and just our various mental experiences. We're not a monolith. We've all got different experiences. So that's what this podcast is about. And without much further ado, I've got a great guest with me today. Probably the guest I've been most excited about in this podcast so far. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. So he is Ben Lindsay. Ben, please introduce yourself to the listeners. Just kind of summarize what you do, and we'll get into it.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you for having me, Nathan. So my name is Ben Lindsay. I'm CEO of a charity called Power the Fight. We empower communities to end youth violence. And I'm also author of a book called We Need to Talk About Race, Understanding the Black Experience in White Majority Churches. I'm a South East London boy and married for 17 years, 3 children, and I'm a Chelsea supporter for my sins.
Nice. I used to say I supported Chelsea just to have an opinion, but the truth is I've never really watched football. So that's how I keep friends now. I keep friends by saying I don't have no side.
It's a good thing. It's a good method.
To
keep you sane. Football. If you want to talk about mental health, football's the one thing that you should take out of your life if you want a good life.
True. But yeah, let's get into sort of your background. First of all, I want to recommend to all of the people listening that the book is great. In my experience, I've read it and I'm rereading it. I think it's a great resource. It's not just for churches, but just for anyone in society, because there's so many applicable things in terms of how we understand black history and black identity, and practical ways we can go about talking about race and things surrounding a race in a more sort of a practical way. So I'd recommend that book. There's a link to it in the description for this episode. So if you order through that link, I can get a small commission through that, which I'll invest back into my content creation. So if you guys could support that way, that'd be excellent. But yeah, let's get into your background, kind of describe where you grew up, how you grew up, and yeah, basically life as a young black Brit for you.
Yeah, so as I said, I grew up in South East London, very specifically sort of like Greenwich Borough. And it was like my upbringing was cool. It was all right. There's a lot of fun in my life. Grew up in a church context. My parents divorced when I was 7, and that was a pretty important moment in my upbringing. But to be fair, I had a lot of love and support from my uncles and my grandma. So my extended family was just up the road. So we lived the road away from where my grandma was, and so we were always in each other's company. I had a happy upbringing.
That's good.
I think it was good. It was all right. But I think what was always the shadow of my upbringing from a young age, and this would be my friends' experiences as well, particularly my black friends, would be the shadow of racism. And we're talking about the type of stuff which we're not talking unconscious bias, and we're not talking, covert. I'm talking about racists who would live on your road, shout the N-word, throw bricks through your window, put dog mess in your bins and through your doorstep, through your letterbox. And every day was an everyday struggle to avoid these people who really didn't like you. So that was my upbringing. But it's like, it was mad, but it just became so normalized that you just knew, you tried to avoid it, and you tried to sort of like not let it get you down, even though we knew it was nuts. but you're just kids and you just try and avoid it really. So that was pretty much the shadow of a pretty decent upbringing. But church dominated my young life. So I went to a Baptist church in Woolwich in Southeast London. Went to Boys Brigade there. Youth club was there. So Fridays was like Boys Brigade. Saturday was like youth club. Sundays was church in the morning. Then we had like church in the evening. Then a lovely couple would open up their house on a Sunday evening for the young people. And then I'll be back at school on Monday. So my whole weekend was dominated by church.
Wow.
But even in that time, I probably was the only black kid. And not probably, I definitely was the only black kid growing up. And I don't think I realised the significance of that until later on in life, really.
Yeah, and you highlight earlier on in your book as well, an unfortunate sort of attack that happened to you as well. I don't know if you want to kind of get into that. Maybe that was maybe the more sort of extreme sort of.
But even what you just said there, most people don't even ask the question whether I want to get into that. So it's interesting what you're saying. Most people just, because it's in the book, assume that you want to talk about it all the time. So I rate that. And I don't mind talking about it. So yeah, when I was 14, I played a lot of football when I was a kid. And it's one like bizarre occasion where I had like a game at the school match in the morning. And then I had an afternoon match for Boys Brigade. So that was pretty rare that would happen. Normally it'd be like alternate kind of weekends So anyway, so I was running late from the school match and basically got home and my mum was like, grab a sandwich and we'll put you in a taxi and a cab to get to Woolwich. So I was coming from I don't know if you know South East London, but I was coming from like Kidbrooke back to my house in Charlton. Then I had to get to Woolwich. So all in all, it was going to be tricky for me to get to kick off in time. I'm in the taxi. I come out to the top of my road. I turn right, go down this hill in the taxi, and I was sitting in the front. And basically, this other car was coming towards us, and the gap was quite small. But the car thought it could make the gap, didn't make the gap, and collided in with us as a car in the car. So I'm 14 years old. I'm in the car. I'm a little bit shaken up. There's an older gentleman who's driving the car in the driver's seat next to me, and he's shaken up. And then these two younger guys, and probably in their 20s, jump out the car, and I'm thinking at 14, wow, they're coming to see if we're all right. How you doing? Hope nothing's. Hope you're okay. But little did I know that actually they were not coming to see how I was. They were coming to assault me, beat me up, drag me out the car, slam my head across like the bonnet. It was a pretty vicious attack, and all along saying all this kind of racist stuff, really, really horrific stuff. And there's big crowds watching, and nobody's really helping or getting involved. The taxi driver, who's a white guy, was getting himself beaten up. I was getting beaten up, and I just thought, this is mad. In my mind at 14, I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to get out of this kind of thing? It's like something out of a film. Managed to slip out of my coat and then run because I wasn't back from my house, too far from my house. So I did that, ran, and then I just remember running back to my house and my mum seeing my face, and it was like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And she was hysterical and crying and stuff. And so that happened. But what the significance, that was bad. Obviously, it was, I've kind of rushed through it, but it was bad because they were ready to kill me, and I got sustained some pretty crazy injuries and stuff. But I think the thing was, it was at a time when, I don't know if your audience knows the story of Stephen Lawrence, but Stephen Lawrence was a young man who was murdered in South East London, a racist murder. Now, the thing about that murder, that happened 3 months after my assault, my attack, and it happened about a mile away from where I was attacked. And it just gives you an idea of the type of environment that black children, black men and women were living in at that time. There's a lot of racism. We grew up very close to Charlton Athletic Football Ground, the Valley.
The National Front, they were quite vocal at that time, weren't they?
Yeah, National Front was huge. And the thing is, it wasn't just Stephen. So Stephen's the one people know about, and rightfully, because it was a horrific crime, a racist crime, and it happened in Eltham. But there was, before that, there was Rohit Dougal, Asian young man who was killed, and there were others. There were other people who were murdered. And it was just one of these things where it was something which was happening, but the pinnacle was Stephen. But what I always think about is that could have been me. You know, it was only 3 months before, and it was a mad time. It was crazy time. And what was mad is that actually my school was very close to where Stephen was killed, just up the road. And therefore there were people in my school who would have known the people who were accused of Stephen's murder. In the same way, there's people in my school who knew Stephen, because Stephen went to a school called Blackheath Bluecoats, which is just up the road. So this is Rio Ferdinand's and Anton Ferdinand's old school. And so we were neighbouring schools. And so I didn't know Stephen, but I knew people in my school and people I'm still very good friends with today who knew Stephen, went to church with Stephen's family and stuff. So we all kind of knew each other and we all knew of each other. And as I'm saying that, there's white guys in my school who knew the accused. So what happened the moment Stephen was murdered? It was like there was just a split in the school. One day we're all playing football together, black and white, no matter what. And then then Stephen died, and literally the next day we just went into tribes. You know, it was one of these things where it just became tribal. So it was a very, very hard time in the early 90s to be a black young boy. And the irony was our parents would then say, I don't want you going out on your own. I want you to go out in a group of people so you feel safe. Now, check the irony of that. Nowadays, we get accused of, if you're in a group of people, that's a gang.
That's a gang, yeah.
You know, that's gang, that's you're troublesome. But that was never our case. Our parents were just like, I'd rather you be walking in a group of people than being on your own. And when they said that, that wasn't us like then grabbing weapons and trying to be in madness. Literally, we were just walking in groups to protect ourselves. So that was going on. And then we had the usual stuff with the police. You know, the police were very not much different to now. You know, stopping and searching us and causing us issues and causing us problems. So we grew up in that, and it was a mad time.
So with all that being said, you know, like you said earlier, a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, especially around your time growing up, was normalized. This sort of stuff will seem to be normalized. And how far along the journey did you realize all of this had been taking a mental toll on you? So you've grown up in the church. Like, what was your perception of the term mental health growing up? And when did you start to... Have you ever started to realize, like, okay, maybe I need to pay attention to my mental health because of the different things I've experienced?
It's a great question. So I don't really think I understood the concept of mental health until probably in my late 20s, early 30s. So it would have been, interestingly, when the assault on me took place, I was given some type of sort of like therapy kind of thing. It was kind of like, go and see this person, she's going to help you. And it was weird because I remember it so clearly. I didn't really want to go. It was in some dark, moody place. This white woman said, oh, you know, we're gonna talk about what happened. And it's the last thing I really wanted to do. I didn't want to talk about it at all. And all she did was just make me repeat everything which went on, and didn't really ask about my welfare. And, you know, it's just a very strange thing.
It sounded like she was more of like a police investigator than an actual therapist.
It felt a bit like that. It felt very much like that. And it felt just very clinical and very cold. So I remember saying to my parents when I came out, I said to my mum and dad, I was like, I don't want to go back. And she said, they were just like, that's fine. You know, no problem. But it wasn't until to 2007, 2008, 2007, there was a young man who I was working with when I was working for the Youth Offending Service. And he was murdered through knife crime. And I just remember a few of us in the team were obviously devastated, and we had to kind of look after ourselves. It wasn't what I would now say clinical supervision. And that was the first time when I kind of saw trauma kind of impact workers. who are frontline workers, working with young people, losing young people, having to deal with quite hardcore cases, and there was no one to really connect in. And then in 2010, I ended up working for a charity, a mental health charity called MAC UK, and they were clinical psychs who were doing like street therapy, engaging with young people. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, engaging with mental health. They're doing stuff with young people who had psychosis, who were on like drug addictions, bipolar, all this type of stuff. And I could see how the therapy they were doing with them was really helping and supporting them. And I think that was the first time around 2010, I was like, whoa, I wonder if, well, I asked the question, why isn't this type of therapy like readily available for anyone who's engaging with families and young people in a traumatic way?
Yeah.
But by that time, I was beginning to think about working for the church, because I was a church pastor for 12 years. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to become a church pastor, I want clinical supervision, because a lot of church pastors don't get it and don't get the clinical supervision, and also burn out. So, and then I suppose when I then became a church pastor and I'm starting to engage with the community on different levels, it was probably when probably Trayvon Martin's murder, which was 2011, 2012, I think. And that's probably the first time, obviously that wasn't the first type of police brutality murder, but it's probably one of the most high profile at that time. And I think at that moment, there was some triggers going off in me where I was a bit like, I think I need to talk to someone about this stuff. Now, I couldn't diagnose it at the time, but what I realized as time went on and more of these murders were coming through, and I talk a little bit about it in the book, secondary trauma was coming through, which is effectively, I'm seeing trauma, somebody else's trauma, and it's impacting me. So it's not my trauma. I'm not necessarily seeing by my own trauma of being impacted by somebody else's stuff, but I'm actually seeing somebody else's pain played out on film. And the more I saw that, the more it reminded me of my own situation back in the 90s. You know, we're talking a good 20 years on now. And it's also seeing other people. So that's when I realized at first, I was like, oi, you know what? I think something's not quite of my mental health. And then when I started going to see a therapist, so I've been having clinical supervision or seeing a counselor for the last 5 years now. And it's only when I started seeing this person, I started exploring some of my own history and my own thinking and my own experiences. And I realized that I've been traumatized by some stuff. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
And do you feel like if you were exposed to that kind of therapy like earlier on in your life, maybe a decade earlier or something, like would you feel it might have helped you, like where do you sometimes think, wow, if only I had this when I was younger or something like that? Or I don't know, is that something you think about? Or
I don't know. I think
not to imply that it's too late or anything.
No, I think when it comes to therapy, it's like anything. It's almost like your mind and body's got to be ready, because I think if you force it, you're likely to reject it. So in my early 20s, I wasn't ready for it, really. You know what I mean? I'm still growing up. I'm still trying to work out who I am. I'm still going through, you know, adolescence in some ways. I'm still just exploring stuff. I became a Christian in my 20s. And to be honest, at that point, I was healed of a lot of stuff, and God completely changed my life. But if I was offered it at that point, I probably wouldn't have taken it. I kind of needed to live a little bit, see some stuff, and then question some stuff. And then once my mind was like, I'm not sure if that matches up with this, or, you know, what the Bible says here doesn't quite match up with my reality. Or then it's like, well, hold on, why are we as Black people always in this kind of rut? Where is this injustice? And then it's when you start asking those questions, that's when you think, I might need some help and support here, because left to my own devices, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, which isn't actually helpful. So basically, I think I think it was my early 30s when I started really asking some questions, which coincides. It was like, no, it coincides with a few things. Just like by the time I hit my mid-30s, I'm having my first child and stuff, and I'm starting thinking about these bits and pieces. But yeah, I think I'm beginning to now think about what's gone on in my life and how do I need help to kind of reconcile some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's powerful that you said that, because we all have our own journeys, isn't it? Like, we all mature at our own pace, and although therapy is great, you know, it might not be for everyone. And my belief is that therapy, I think there's different types of therapy. We can find therapy in different things, you know, like the conversations we can have with our family members can also be, in a sense, therapeutic. So for some young people, all they might need is just a bit more transparency with people they already know in family, and that might help them. For some people, they might need more sort of clinical help. So yeah, I think that's a good point to raise. Like, we can't just use a broad paintbrush to paint.
I think it's a good point you make.
Thing.
So, you know, we recently put out a report looking at some of this stuff around youth violence and violence which affects young people and families. And one of the things we found is that there are many different types of therapy out there, whether it's creative, culturally, as well as the formal and informal stuff. But yeah, I think you got to find what's right for you, you know, and it might be art or drama therapy, or it could be more sort of like the physical movement stuff. It could be what we call like a co-produced, co-designed stuff. And I think also even sometimes the term therapy isn't helpful, because I think what I would say, so my experience would be, and this is not for all Black people, so I can't talk, I'm not like, you know, the word in the street for all Black people. But what I would say is that a lot of Black people I have met, particularly the older generation, would struggle with therapy. So I got family members who would say, Black people, we haven't got time to be depressed. We're working too hard. So don't
real talk.
Don't use the terms depressed around me. we got work to do. So I'm like, right. So that's how I grew up. Like, depression, sure, we haven't got time for it. So, but we know actually that is when you look at statistics, when you look at the race disparity audit 2018, and you look at the kind of, like, it's like the league table of all things which are wrong for Black people. And when you look at mental health, it's Black women, actually. Black women are 3 to 1 more likely to be in the mental health system. So, you know, that whole, we don't really do therapy, we don't really talk mental health. It's a shame, because actually we find ourselves in these institutions and on antidepressants more than any other person in the country. So, and I think there's tradition, culture, history. When my parents and grandparents came to this country, they were here to work hard. And to be fair, they probably tried to hold it together on their own so the family wouldn't crumble. But the truth is, you know, a lot of that generation could have done with some support and help. But it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. But I think things are getting better now, you know, which we'll get into later, you know, just with the weird awakening that's been happening this year. And even it's interesting because, like, me and you, I guess we represent kind of different generations, and it kind of feels like my generation, we've had to grow up a lot quicker. Obviously through what you mentioned earlier, like the exposure to things like Trayvon Martin and the police brutality online and everything. Like, I can see you're smiling.
Well, I just think it's funny. I'm not. I mean, one thing I have to do is respect your generation and your opinion. So if you're saying to me, you know what, as a young person, it feels like I have to go out faster. I respect that.
I mean, yeah, it depends how you look at it. Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm here to be challenged.
What I mean, so don't get it twisted. I'm interested in why you think you've had to go out faster. What's your kind of what's your experience? So is it because you've had to grow up with the Trayvons and the Mike Browns and all this type of stuff? Do you think that's the reason why you've had to grow up faster?
I'd say for the most part, I guess for the typical young black person, it's less about personal experience, I guess, and more about having a knowledge of the landscape on a whole, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming from your perspective, it's more of a some personal thing that you've experienced because, whereas with me, it's like, it's just the rate at which news is coming in and just information.
Yeah, so I would
So
agree
I think
with
it's the
that.
information. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. So I think what you definitely have, which I didn't have, was the rate of media. So if something happened in America when I was 22, I wouldn't hear about it unless I read about it or I heard about it on the radio. Pretty much those are the two mediums. The internet wasn't anywhere near as big as it is now. Back when I was 22 years old, I'm the generation who can still remember life before the internet. There's these things called books and libraries, which we had to deal with. But so I remember that, and so I do feel that what's changed now is that technology has changed. I'll give you an example. An example which might be a bit hardcore, but it's just a clear example. If I wanted pornography when I was a kid, I'd have to walk out of my house, walk up the road, go to Mr. Patel's shop, and his name was Mr. Patel before anybody accuses me of being racist. His name is Mr. Patel. Walk into his shop, I'd have to reach for the top shelf to get the magazine, go to the counter, the same counter which my mum and my grandma uses, pay for this magazine, and then go about my business. Do you honestly think I was going to do that? There was no way that was happening. So that gives you an idea. Now, your generation, if you want pornography, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more accessible. It's a click away. So that gives you an idea of like the world, how the world has just changed in between my generation and your generation, right? In 20 years, there's a 20-year gap between us. And that's just pornography. We haven't spoken about violence. We haven't spoken about the level of violence which is accessible. If you want to see what happened to a particular altercation between young people across London, there's Instagram pages for all that type of stuff, you know what I mean? And Snapchat and all this madness. So going back to the point, I think you guys definitely, the influx of information and the things that you are seeing is at a level which is unprecedented. And that's why I do actually think when it comes to mental health, I'm so pleased that conversation is happening at a lot earlier age than I would have ever had. You know, I think it's so important. But do I think, and I know we're not trying to compare, but think what you are going through is any worse than the actual physical abuse, emotional, verbal abuse, which my generation went through on a daily basis? Well, I don't think it's fair to compare. What I would say is this. What I went through would be traumatizing for me on a community level. And I think what you guys go through is also traumatizing for you on a community level. And what I mean by that is that there's a collective trauma. So when Stephen Lawrence was murdered, there was a collective trauma for Black people. Young, old, intergenerational, my age, younger and older. It was like, wow, Stephen was murdered, and he was just, not only was he murdered, there was no justice for 25 years, you know what I mean? So it was like, this is a mad, mad, mad situation. But I know there's young people I work with and families I've connected in with, even if you're not involved with youth violence or knife crime or gangs, the perception of it is enough to drive you over the edge. So there's a statistic recently I read which 72% of all Londoners look at knife crime as being a problem in their community. 57% of those people are only getting that from the media. So it's not lived experience, it's media perception. That tells you all you need to know, really, how powerful the media can be when we're talking about issues which can impact your mental health. So I get what you're saying. I totally get it.
Yeah. I mean, there's that goes to show there's various ways of experiencing trauma, and one method could be for some people just as traumatizing as another, because it also depends on the person as well, and how much and what triggers them as well. So
totally. And it's not one size fits all. And I think the human mind and emotions are very, very complicated. So I agree.
I'm afraid that is the end of this part of this interview. Stay tuned for the next part of the interview in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Peace.